Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sutta study session here with Empty Cloud Monastery. So we'll be continuing with the Dhammapada verses, so we can start by paying homage to the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as mentioned, we'll be continuing with the Dhammapada verses. So today, the ones that I selected to speak about are the first two verses from chapter 2 of the Dhammapada. So this is Dhammapada verses 21 and 22. Although the second chapter is not strictly arranged in pairs as the first one is, the first two verses are clearly a set pair. They're clearly meant to go together. So I'll read these together. So chapter 2 of the Dhammapada is called the Apomara Vagga, so the chapter on Apomara. And this is a very important concept to understand. So Apomara is a word which appears throughout the suttas as being an attitude of mind which is critical for the development of the path, which is very important in the application of Buddhist practice. And one of the most commonly known quotes that uses the word Apomara is the Buddha's last words. So the Buddha's last words were recorded in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta as being Vayadhamma Sankhara Apamadena Sampadeta. So Vayadhamma Sankhara means all sankharas, so all conditional phenomena, all things, are subject to disappearance. So Vayadhamma. So he's pointing here to the impermanence of things, the fact that all things are subject to cessation. This is particularly relevant that he said this right before passing away, because of course everyone was relying upon the Buddha for instructions on the path to awakening. But the Buddha was pointing out that even he himself is impermanent. His body is impermanent. His presence is impermanent. It's not reliable. But the same is true of all things. All things are subject to vanishing, subject to cessation, to disappearance, to change. And then the last two words that the Buddha is believed to have said were apamadena sampadeta. So sampadeta means to, literally means to completely attain or to perfect. So sampadeta means to reach perfection or complete your practice. And apamadena means using apamada or by means of apamada. So through apamada. So apamada is from the word pamada. So pamada is usually translated as negligence or heedlessness. And it's actually related to the word mada, which means intoxicant or intoxication. So pamada is the state of mind which is similar to being intoxicated. So when we're intoxicated, when we're drunk or stoned or whatever, then the mind it's a bit blurry, it's a bit unclear. We lack self-restraint. We're not very careful. We're not very vigilant. We're not very attentive. We're not very diligent or heedful in anything that we're doing. So the state of intoxication is a state of recklessness, which is another way you could translate the word pamada. So pamada, again, often translated as negligence, could also be translated as recklessness. So apamada then is the opposite, or more precisely, it's the absence of pamada. So the prefix a means non. So apamada means non-negligence, non-recklessness, non-heedlessness. And this is often translated in a strong positive. So apamada is often translated as vigilance or diligence or heedfulness. But I think there's a risk because the Buddha here, he's literally just putting it in the negative. So non-negligence, non-recklessness. So for example, if you say that something is not difficult, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. If you say something is not dark, that doesn't necessarily mean it's light. You might be pointing to something in the middle. It's not dark, but it's not light. It's not difficult, but it's not easy. So there's some danger here in taking a negation of a word to imply a strong positive opposite that word. So that's quite, again, it's a little bit risky in that we pose a chance of missing the Buddha's message. We pose a risk of putting words in the Buddha's mouth, which is something that we always want to be very careful not to do. We always want to be very careful to present the Buddha's words as faithfully and accurately as possible. So we always want to be very careful not to misrepresent the Buddha's teachings. So apamada then is non-negligence, the absence of recklessness, the absence of heedlessness. Again, the Buddha's last words, apamadena sampadeta. So he's saying practice for perfection without negligence. So without any recklessness or heedlessness, keep striving onwards for the complete perfection of your practice, the attainment of complete awakening. And another very well-known example of the word apamada is actually from these two verses that I'm about to read. So Dhammapada verse 21 starts with the phrase apamado amata padang. I translated that here as non-negligence is the path of the deathless. So I'll go ahead and read through these verses and then I'll go through them in more detail. So the Dhammapada verse 21 and 22 says, non-negligence is the path of the deathless. Negligence is the path of death. Those who are not negligent never die. Those who are negligent are as if dead. In this way, the wise distinctly understand non-negligence. They rejoice in non-negligence, enjoying the territory of the noble ones. So another very short verse. So the Buddha, in the Dhammapada verses, the Buddha uses very sparse language, which is why it's necessary to go through it very carefully to really pick out the meaning of what he's trying to say. So starting with this first line, apamado amata padang. So apamada, as I just mentioned, is non-negligence. So the absence of recklessness, the absence of heedlessness, the absence of this intoxicated, blurry, unrestrained state of mind. So he says, apamado amata padang. So amata means literally means not dead, undead. So not subject to death. So he's not talking about zombies here. He's talking about nibbana. So nibbana is called the amata. The deathless, that which is not subject to death. And pada means path. Now, actually, pada has a few different meanings. So it can also mean foot or track. or in the context of language, it has the meaning of a phrase or a sentence or word. So Dhammapada is words of Dhamma, verses of Dhamma. But here pada appears to have the meaning of path, which is why it's translated this way. And amata padang is path of the deathless. And you'll see this translated in various ways, like the path to the deathless, or the deathless path. But the reason I chose to translate this as path of the deathless is because of the next phrase. So the word amata padang is grammatically ambiguous. But the next phrase, which is the matching pair to this one, clears up the ambiguity. So the next phrase is pamado machuno padang. So pamada, again, as I mentioned, pamada is negligence or recklessness, this quality of intoxicated, blurry, unrestrained heedlessness. Machuno means of death. So machu means death or mortality. And it's in the genitive case, so of death. And padang, so again, the path. So machuno padang, the path of death. So what the Buddha is pointing to here is death here is standing in for the whole cycle of birth and death that we experience in samsara. So we are born and we live for a while and then we die. And if we are still stuck in self-identity, still stuck in the craving for continued individual existence, then we will continue to exist. So there'll be another birth of some sort. We'll come into another state of being. And that will last for a while and then we'll die, and so on. So this constant cycle of death and rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth. And this is caused because of negligence, because we're not putting forth sincere, diligent, ongoing effort in Buddhist practice. So we neglect the precepts, we neglect morality, we neglect practicing generosity, we neglect samadhi, we neglect wisdom, we neglect compassion. And as a result, we don't develop the spiritual qualities necessary for making any kind of significant breakthrough. So we just keep cycling through death after death after death after death, constantly experiencing the misery and torment of samsara. Death is also commonly used in the suttas as an abbreviation of the whole mass of dukkha. So the whole mass of dukkha includes birth, decay, sickness. It includes sorrow, pain, grief, despair. So all the different varieties and ways that we experience pain and anguish in samsara. And death is held up as one of the prime examples of this. So the contrast here, so the main thrust of the Buddha's statement is non-negligence is the path of the deathless. In other words, putting forth a sincere effort in our practice, so not neglecting sila, samadhi, and panya, not neglecting our current experience. So having a clear awareness of what we're doing with our body, speech, and mind at all times, and constantly making an effort to carefully develop wholesome spiritual qualities. So then the next line, the Buddha says, those who are not negligent never die. Those who are negligent are as if dead. So those who are not negligent never die. If you take this at face value, it sounds like immortality. But Buddhism is not about immortality. It's not about trying to make this body live forever. And it's not about trying to make this mind live forever either. But rather it's about escaping the whole cycle of birth and death. It's recognizing that the cycle of birth and death is the direct consequence of self-identity. As long as we identify as an individual being, then that individual being is going to be composed of impermanent components, which are constantly arising and ceasing. And therefore, there will be the experience of birth and death. That's inescapable. But through diligently, carefully, persistently practicing the Buddha's teachings, we can relinquish self-identity, which means we no longer are attached to, we're no longer identifying as any sankhara, so anything or component which is subject to impermanence. Therefore, we're no longer subject to death, because we're not identifying as anything in samsara. We're not identifying as anything which is subject to birth and death. And he said, and the next line here, this is one I've always found very poetic. And there's different ways that this is translated. Here I translated it as, those who are negligent are as if dead. And I might go back and rewrite this line a bit. Another way you could say this is, those who are negligent are as if already dead. The Bhante Suddhaso translated this line, while the heedless are like the dead. This is bringing forward the idea that if we're going through life with this reckless, unclear, blurry state of mind, this unrestrained, careless attitude, then it's like we're already dead. So we've already killed off our own good qualities. So we're going through the world actually a bit like a zombie. We're going through the world in this hazy, blurry, uncontrolled way. So in a way which is, again, what's the nature of someone who's dead? Someone who's dead is not capable of helping themselves or helping anybody else. So it's the same. If we lack Apomara, so if we're caught up in negligence and recklessness, then we're no good to ourselves and we're no good to anybody else. We're completely useless. Again, just as if we were already dead. And then it says, the next verse, it says, in this way, the wise distinctly understand non-negligence. They rejoice in non-negligence, enjoying the territory of the noble ones. The main point here is, again, the territory of the noble ones. So noble ones in Buddhism, this word Arya, usually refers to those who have attained at least the first stage of awakening. So this is pointing to the fact that the natural behavior and domain of awakened beings is freedom from negligence, freedom from recklessness or carelessness. So their natural state of mind is one of carefulness, of vigilance, of heedfulness. So this is a quality that then we should be seeking to emulate. We should be trying to bring up that the same qualities of the noble ones, the same qualities of awakened beings. One way of talking about Buddhism is that we're actively trying to imitate the qualities of awakened beings, because in so doing, we actually start to restructure our mind, to retrain our mind so that we become more wholesome, we become more wise, we become more compassionate, and therefore we become more awakened, closer to enlightenment. So that's the end of these two verses, and I think that's all I have to say on it for now. So at this time, I'm happy to take any questions. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in at this time. Thank you. And hello to all the people checking in. So hello to Gita, Jayanta, Yanatin, Anne, Kumu, Guerlina, Patricia, Michael, Niranjan, and Seisei. Welcome to all of you. Happy to see you participating. And I'm not seeing any questions coming up. Anything from the residents? No. So if there's no questions, then we could go ahead and end at this time. So this evening we'll have a special monk chat session with Master Jian Hu, and a panel of different monks will be coming together to ask him questions. So Master Jian Hu is one of the senior Chan monks from Taiwan. So we'll have a panel of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis from different traditions to ask questions. And if there's time, we'll also take questions from the general audience. So please do join in this evening. It should be an interesting session. And it looks like Sud is starting to ask a question. So this says, when we chant Apomara, Buddho, Apomara, Dhammo. So I think you're referring to one of the Paritta chants. But in that Paritta chant, it's Apamana, not Apamado. So Apamana means immeasurable. So without measure, without limit. So in that chant, one is saying the Buddha has no limits. It's immeasurable. Same like Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha are immeasurable, unlimited. So the words sound quite similar, but they're very different meaning. And Gita asks, how does one know or test oneself to see if we have let go? If there's suffering, that's your test. Do you experience dukkha? If you're experiencing dukkha, then that's because you haven't let go. That's really what it comes down to. So there is a certain danger which can sometimes come up where we think we're practicing letting go, but we're actually practicing apathy. And the reason you can tell the difference is because the state of apathy still has a subtle layer of dukkha. It has a certain degree of peacefulness, but there's also a certain degree of dukkha. The dukkha of not wanting to be bothered, of not wanting to, of wanting to avoid any kind of involvement. So if you look at that state of mind, you'll see that there's still some attachment going on. There's attachment to the apathy itself. So just as one example of how if you look for dukkha, then you can tell where you're still holding on, where you still need to let go. And that looks like it for the questions. So we'll go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.